Hello, everyone, and welcome to Migrant Munch. My name is Dr. Sharika Senamiratna, and I'll be your host on this podcast. Let's dive into today's story. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Migrant Munch. Today we have Doctor to be Dorcas. That's how we decided we would introduce you, Dorcas. Over to you to introduce yourself officially to us.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation. So officially, as you mentioned, I'm Dr. to be. I am a PhD candidate at Swinburne University of Technology. And currently, my official name without the doctor is Ramadimecha Dorcas Mapakela. I am a South African-born Mopedi woman. I am a multidisciplinary creative. I'm also a researcher. And I write for the ABC and for Arts Hub. I'll leave it that brief, and then the rest we'll learn as we go. So thank you.
I love how you just said, you're just doing a PhD. You're also doing all these other things. So I'd like to know what brought you to this point in your life where you're involved in so many amazing things.
I have been very lucky to get to do the things that I love. And I usually say anything that I get involved in, it feels like an extension of who I am as a person. When I first got here about 19 years ago, I was coming here because of art. So I was studying fine arts in South Africa. Funny thing is, art was marketed as being poor. I did my degree and I was like, I don't want to be poor, so I'm going to go find a job. And then I ended up working in the TV and film industry, in front of camera and behind camera. And then at some point, I was like, maybe I must make use of my degree. And there was a gentleman who came to our end of year kind of, I wouldn't say showcase, exhibition. And he gave us his contact details, and he was running a project called South South. And he happened to be from Australia. So he gave us his card. And at some point I emailed him and I was like, hey, I'd love to come to your organization, which is Craft Victoria, to come and learn and then come back home and, share and start an NGO with some of my friends that we graduated together, et cetera, et cetera. But look at me now. I'm here. Look, I'm not complaining. I do not regret any of it. I think, life is what it is, and I've embraced it. And now I get to call Australia home by choice, luckily. So one thing led to the other. And all the other stuff that I was doing, somewhere along the line, they were related to art, but also because it was a certain period in Australia. And I happened to be here at that time. And there was a lot of I don't know what's the right word to use, but as an African community, we were still emerging. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, there was a lot of racial injustices and how the media was covering stories. And, I could have sat there with everybody and just pointed what was going wrong. But because of what I had learned and the experiences that I've had, in the professional setting, I thought, what can I do? That's how I sort of partly started Oz African TV. But, it was also because I remember my kids at the time, they were watching TV at home and it was talking about South Africa. And so, they were watching these people who look like me just living their lives in the streets of Johannesburg, I think at the time. And they kind of looked at me and they're like, do you know these people? Like, they look like you. We've never seen this on our TV screen. And I was like, oh yeah, I know them. They're my cousins. And it was a funny little thing. And then we kind of chuckled. But then it kind of made me reflect, because then I looked at the thing through their eyes and I was like, oh, this can't be the only way that they see someone like myself on TV and kind of just living their lives, rather than being on a news story or, or talking about how awful it is back home and all of that kind of stuff. And I think that's where my connection to the community started, by putting together Oz African TV. That moment where I saw my kids going, well, this is all we get to see. So I thought, let me do my part. That kind of opened up a door for me to get involved, not only in the African community, but in the culturally diverse space at large. And that kind of has brought me to where I am today. And as we introduced myself at the top, Dr. to be, I'm researching culture so to speak, and also researching innovative ways of preserving and safeguarding intangible cultural and traditional practices. And I'm using initiation process from Bapedi people as my focus point, because, you know, there's so much that we could talk about.
That's a beautiful topic. And I think it kind of aligns really well with what you were saying about how everything has brought you to this point in terms of your love for arts. And then you came over and then you realized that there was obviously limited exposure to African TV shows or television. And then that led you to looking at culture as part of your PhD. And it looks like it's just happened so naturally, but I'm sure there's so much of work that went into that.
Yes, I think it's interesting because doing this, I remember I was a guest on campus at Swinburne. We were talking to year nines, and one kid asked me, because we sent our bios, so they read a bit about what we're doing, and he said to me, "Well, you've studied so many things and you've done so many things. Why bother doing a PhD now? Like, don't you have enough information in your head?" I was like, yeah, actually, you're right. I do have enough information in my head. But then I think, as you mentioned as well, it felt like a natural progression. And you know, when that kid asked me, I thought, well, I could have chosen one of the two ways. I could have chosen to just go, well, let me write a book or something and kind of just share with people some of the learnings that I've done over this period. Or I could do the PhD route, because I feel like it's more helpful, maybe, if that's the word, because then I'm building a community. I'm talking to people who are helping me to kind of frame it in a way that not only it's going to be shared as information, but one of my things that I would really love to do is to highlight that some of our traditional practices and knowledge systems are so important, and they are worth safeguarding and also worth studying. You know, as much as we can study other subject matters, I think what we know and how our communities, you know, from pre-colonial times, how they lived is quite important. And if I can put in my drop in the ocean, it'd be amazing to kind of put it in a place of knowledge like a university space, and then kind of see what that brings, not only for me, but you know, for the next generation, for diaspora at large and other cultures, as well as creating that dialogue between Australia and Africa.
That translates so well to other cultures as well, right? Like, if we don't focus on preserving those intangible components of our culture, so not just the things you can see, but how you feel, the traditions as well that are passed down through generations, it's going to end and it's going to be forgotten at some point, right?
That's true. I think it's such a shame because, you know, I sit here and think at some point I had all my grandparents living, and I didn't have the right, I don't know if it's the language or maybe it's like the framework to kind of ask the right questions. And now I'm sitting here going, these things, I can't Google them, you know, because again, as we said, it's intangible traditional practices. You have to learn them by seeing, by doing, by sitting with those people and kind of seeing what they do and how they sit and what they tell you. You know, I do remember some of these things, but I feel like my kids' generation, they might not know those things.
It sounds like it influenced you as a parent as well. Like when you became a parent, that's when you started to realize that, like, my kids are questioning why they can't see people like themselves more often in real life.
And now that I know that it's important for their generation to see a variety of people, now it's important to kind of frame it in a way that I go, what would I like them to see? You know, because the unfortunate thing is that here in Australia, or at least what I've noticed, is we are still kind of building our own voice as an African community. So then the younger generation, especially the ones that kind of live in that third culture space where they are, you know, not enough of African or not enough of this, because they are made up of all of these wonderful things, they tend to look towards the Americas or the UK, for that African culture, because those spaces have had a long time to kind of build what their identity looks like and what makes them African or Black or whatever, however they want to express themselves. And so for me, I feel like sometimes the link to Africa is where we all kind of come from gets missed. And so I want to kind of continue that link, that thread, that even though we're here, we still embody that, because in their generations they'll get married to another culture, and then it keeps getting diluted and diluted and diluted, which is fine. It's what the world is becoming, and it should be embraced. But I feel like my responsibility, or what I have made my responsibility, is to kind of always remind them that within these cultures that there are these other knowledge systems and this embodied tradition that you carry with you, and it's within your DNA. And in my my research, it's titled Wamala, which means of color, as in a person of color. But there's a whole story behind it why I chose that. But it's called Wamala, writing ancestral memory. So it's going to culminate in that documentary. So it's about like writing it, but remembering it and kind of remembering yourself. For me, it's not about going outside of yourself to go and find yourself. It's about remembering who you are, because it lives within you. And so I'm hoping that by doing the work that I do, I can kind of help them find ways to, wherever they are in the world, wherever we are in the world as people, to kind of go, oh, let me watch this or let me read this. And then I can go and sit with myself and interrogate these things, or at least apply some of them to kind of know where I've come from.
I also was thinking about it and going, Africa is more of a collectivistic culture, right? Where there's a lot of a community aspect to it. And so I think that's a very important part of what needs to be preserved, is connecting everyone together. Like you said yourself, when your kids saw those people on TV, you said, oh, those are my cousins, as a joke. And that itself
They're probably my cousins. But you're right. It is. It's like, it's very, very, and because I come from, Bapedi ethnic group, who are situated in the northern parts of South Africa. And, we've migrated to many different parts of South Africa where, that's where my lineage comes from. But I live in Pretoria, which is an urban society where you've got, the Zulu people, the Xhosa people, the Venda people, Bapedi people. We all kind of mix, and just like here, we mingle, we marry, we do all of that good stuff. And so there's this sense of communal, and some of the things that are important to me are similarly important to other cultures as well. And there is that sense of communal and doing things together and learning from each other and kind of teaching one another. So it feels natural to me to kind of go, yeah, we're related. And because, the whole idea of it takes a village, and that's truly what it means. It takes a village, because every grown up, you look at them and you can see your mother in them. Therefore you have that respect for them. I'd say to parents, there is power in kind of, practicing what you say in subtle ways. I find when you say to kids, well, now I'm going to teach you about this and that, and they'll be like, oh my God, no, you're not, So yeah, so making our culture cool and finding moments and opportunities to bring our cultural stuff, and that those intangible traditional practices, just because I've learned a lot from watching my mom or my grandmother do stuff. And now I remember, I'm like, oh, I remember that. I remember seeing her do this. She never stopped and say, I am now going to teach you this. No, she just did it when it was time to do it. So I think parents, if we start to kind of throw it in there every now and then, and then they can just see you do this one thing all the time. And then they'll be like, oh, maybe get curious. And then suddenly they'll be like, oh, culture is cool. So
yeah. And what's your favorite tradition then?
I love clothes. I love dressing up. I love, all of it. So I go to town. I remember when I did a little photo shoot with my daughter, and, I called my friend to come and do it. And then I dressed her up. I had like this thing, and she loves jewelry and she loves earrings. So I bought her, like it's not like my traditional, but it was like beaded jewelry, and kind of she mixed it up with whatever jewelry she was wearing, and she was like, oh, this is cool. And sometimes she just looks at it and she wears it here and there, and so that's kind of like, for me, how we express ourselves with fashion, for example. It's the first thing, because then traditionally and as an embodied tradition and knowledge, different things were worn for different reasons. Okay. And so, like a married woman would wear this and a young girl would wear that. And so because we don't really follow that system at the moment, that's not to say I can't buy that beaded piece of jewelry. And then if she likes it, she might be curious about it. And then we might talk about how, certain beads mean certain things culturally. And so that my favorite thing and my easiest and accessible thing is fashion. Absolutely. Wow. I mean, food too, but fashion is kind of, because it's on your body as well. And then you own it and you kind of have to know what you're wearing, or at least be curious about it.
And it seems to me like, from just listening to what you were saying, I feel like there's so much more to learn about everyone's cultures. And just even when you were saying, oh, beads, like they could mean different things. That's something I would have never known if not for this conversation. And out of curiosity, right? So if someone listening in now to this podcast goes, you've piqued my interest and I want to learn more about where I come from and my culture, what would you say is the first thing that they need to do?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I run a workshop called WENA, WENA, which means you. And it really asks about you, about yourself. And so in this workshop, I use my Bapedi Basotho ba Leboa framework to work on an introduction about yourself. I'm still learning this, but I'm using what I have, and through my PhD as well, I'll learn further. But what that workshop does is it kind of makes you think a little bit deeper. In my culture, we have totems as well. Mm-hmm. Our totem is my father's side totem is porcupine, and my mom's side is elephant. Mm. And so when in the workshop we talk about that as one of a way to kind of build that identity and that introduction. That's one area. And then another one would be yourself, where you are as a person. Like, you kind of think about what do people say about you? And how can you use that as part of your identity, because that's how they already see you. And so also, how do you see yourself? And you can use a bit of that as part of your identity. So I'd say for anybody who's curious, or maybe is kind of thinking, how do I start where I am to interrogate who I am? I'd say, look at your lineage first, like there's those family trees and all of that, but think about which part of the world you come from. What are those people known for? Or what does that space, like how does the world know that space? And what are some of the great things that your people have done? Just because you're here in Australia and maybe you don't have access, just read about all of those things. And that way you kind of start to go, oh, actually, I'm pretty awesome.
That's a great suggestion. And I think it goes back very nicely to something we were talking about offline around how a lot of people don't really know what they don't know, or they sort of live their lives, go on in their bubbles without paying attention to, where do I come from, or where does the other person come from, or how does it impact them when I act in this way, and so on.
Absolutely. And I think when you know yourself, you absolutely appreciate other people, because you go, hold on, maybe that person didn't come here by choice. And does that person have a family? When you think about it, you're like, actually, I do come from somewhere. I do belong to a certain group of people. And whether it's a difficult history, it's important to kind of acknowledge where you've come from. Identity is fluid. You're here today. What are you doing with that knowledge? And how are you building yourself to be a person who contributes positively to the society that you're a part of? Yeah.
How does this passion you have for preserving culture translate to all the other things you're doing? Because you're involved in so many different things, right?
I came here 19 years ago, and I think that it's been a slow progress to kind of go, okay, I've worked here, I've worked on Neighbours for like 7 years, and it was great because working there it taught me about the Australian society. both behind the scenes and in front of camera. I got to interact with people who were born here, people who came from somewhere, but like they're Australians. Then Oz African TV came, and then I started to know that, oh, there are more African people, which it's a funny thing when you're new to Australia. You're like, oh, I'm just here as an African person in this little corner of Melbourne and there's no one. And then you meet one African person and then they go, come. And then you get to a room and they're like, there are more of us. Yeah. And so, I think for me, and then that happened. And then I started working in the culturally diverse space as well. And so I started to interact with other cultures as well. And I saw that we do have a common ground where there's a need for us to tell our stories. And we have all these beautiful stories and beautiful cultures, whether it's through art or through academia, that we want to share with the world. What I've noticed is most culturally diverse communities, we just love to share. When a person comes, we open the door, we'll give you our food. We want to share our stories, but we didn't have a lot of platforms for that to happen. And, that's the space that I try to work in as well. And then I get to MC, I get to moderate conversations. Again, I'm learning different things and how people think. And sometimes I'm in a situation where I'm like, oh, wow, we're going to talk about AI. Great. Let's have a conversation. And because I'm a research writer, that's my master's. I did master's in writing. I can pretty much research any topic, which is lucky, because if you go, hey, do you want to moderate this conversation about, I don't know, whatever, like wood? I'll be like, absolutely, I can do that. Oh, I know stuff about it. I think because I've always stayed curious and open, it has brought me to here. And I've realized that kind of holds us is our cultural practices. And we call Australia home, and we love it here. And we want to be able to safely share about ourselves. And so I thought, what can I do? And so I began with myself and thought, I do have academia background. I love learning. And so the best way for me to do is to kind of do it this way. And I think doing it from my perspective and finding myself here in Australia, it's really interesting because I'm hoping to encourage other people from other cultures as well to kind of go, hold on, maybe I can do my master's in my own culture. And that way I'm safeguarding it myself, and I'm also writing it for posterity, rather than waiting for somebody outside of my culture to come and look at us and then go and become a specialist of my own culture. And researching culture, particularly African culture, is probably, the perfect thing to do for me right now.
That's amazing. And I'm so excited to see what comes out of the PhD research as well. I know, again, you said it's a couple of years out, but I'm sure it'll be very impactful because the passion that you have for the work that you're doing is just so evident.
I hope so. I really hope so. I am passionate about it.
I appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing your story, your journey in Australia, and also talking about the work that you're doing, the passion that you have for the work that you're doing, and also the impact that you want to make. So really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your platform, and not just telling my story. I've listened to the stories, and it's wonderful to just hear about what people are doing, the challenges they face, but also our contribution to Australia. It's really important to archive these stories. So thank you for your work.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Mwah.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Migrant Munch. If you really liked what you heard today, reach out to us, get in touch, tell us what really inspired you, and we'd love to connect with you and hear more about your story.